Well, good afternoon, everyone. So great to see all of you here again for part 2 of a very challenging and inspiring session that we had last month that we were asked to have another session that focuses on the topic that we used last month, and so that is why we are here today with the social justice and leadership again today. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge the fact that some of the folk that attended last time is not going to be here today, and they called to let me know that they cannot be here for whatever reason, and that's Diane Allcamp and Maureen McDermott, Mickey McGuire, and Dr. Salzman. Also, too, Tatiana was on our panel last month, but she has some issues at home and she's not able to make it with us today. So we keep her and her loved ones in our prayers that everything will be okay there. And we still have our dynamic panel in front of us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from them yet again today. And we all know them, they're our colleagues, and I'm going to get this right today, Clyde, okay? And you know what happened last time, big boo-boo, okay? But Clyde said he would take that any day, right? But anyway, come on, please have a seat. Okay. All right. And what we'll do today, the format of our discussion today, is that we will hear from our panelists again, and then I'll share some things with you from some information that I found that I think is relevant to our discussion today. And then we'll have interaction from you with the panel and among each other and that sort of thing as we sort of work through this discussion. This discussion last month was sort of predicated on all of the events surrounding the Trayvon Martin situation. And while we may go back to that again in some context today, we wanted to sort of move that forward a little bit in looking at what happens beyond that situation, keeping in mind where it is now. There's been some events that have unfolded since that time, but where does all of that set within our daily lives in terms of what we do on a daily basis, what we should do, what we see our society doing, and especially in the context of leadership and education. I'll throw that in as well. So we are excited about getting this started, and we're going to get it started by, I didn't know if we were going to toss a coin today, but we're going to let our panel decide in which order they want to speak with us to get us started today.
No, you came to my house.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll begin.
You've got a very energetic panel here.
Do we need one?
Yeah, come on, pick it up here.
Can you hear me? Good morning. Thank you for coming. The crowd is thinned out since last month, considerably. I know it's the first week of the summer semester, but thank you for coming. A lot's happened since we were here last month. Last month, when we had our first panel, there was no arrest in the case. Since then, of course, everyone knows the facts of the case. He's been arrested and charged. He's out on bail, and there's various things being put out there in the media. But I want to talk about equal justice, fair justice in our judicial system as a context. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, since it was brought up last time by Tatiana about the Arthur McDuffie case, that 20 years ago this past Saturday was the LA riots, spurred by the Rodney King decision. And those of you who were old enough to remember, of course, names like Rodney King and Darrell Gates and Tom Bradley and Reginald Denny became household names 20 years ago today. But I want to talk about 17 years ago, not 20 years ago. And before I get to 20 years ago in October of 1995, and where we were all at that time, talking about the OJ decision, I wanted to go back to the statement I made last month where I said that I was naive, or foolishly naive, to think that we had turned this page. If you remember, I said that last month, on the election night in 2008, that we had moved past this race debate. Never, of course, did I envision the teenager becoming a national story from right here in North Miami Beach, but I never envisioned at the time that we would have a sit-in president called a liar during a State of the Union speech. Someone questioned his birth heritage. People questioned his religion. People questioned the academic credentials that he earned. A sitting governor pointed a finger in the sitting president's face on the tarmac. A federal judge sent racist emails about the President of the United States, and a congressman making remarks about the First Lady's physique. So I was naive in election night to think that we had turned this page, because 17 years ago, October 1995, is one of those defining moments. I'm sure you remember where you were, if you were watching the OJ verdict when it came out. Sort of like, not so much the Kennedy moment for me, but I certainly remember where I was when the Challenger blew up. I remember where I was when 9/11, of course, happened, but I was on the main campus in the Parker building. There's only 4 buildings back then, a lot of modulars, but and although we had internet and email, they didn't stream live media on the internet. So we all went to a lounge where there was a television. And about 50 people crammed into this room when they announced that Judge Lancito was entering the courtroom and they'd have a verdict that came out. Do you remember this moment?
Absolutely, yeah.
And how many of you were in a room by yourself, or were you in a room with other people?
Other people.
There were about 50 people in this little tiny room at Park in the Parker building, and it was spilling out, and it was made up of staff, primarily African American, Caribbean American, administration and faculty, all curious, that joined this one TV up on the 3rd floor. And that moment was quite memorable to me, because I never saw news presented that elicited 2 very contrasting opinions, from hooting and hollering and high-fiving and crying in joy and happiness, to outright shock and chagrin of other people, to the point where it was so uncomfortable that it was strictly down the racial line that people left the room and were celebrating out in the hallway, down the hallway, and the rest of us just stood there with our mouths open. And I thought, wow. So I'm bringing that up because, why am I bringing that up? Because since we spoke, a USA Today Gallup poll survey was conducted last month, and it came out. And it's not surprising, but when you hear the context now, the USA Today Gallup poll found that most blacks, this is prior to the arrest of George Zimmerman, believe that George Zimmerman is definitely guilty of a crime. It also found out that nearly 3/4 of blacks believe that racial bias was a major factor in the shooting and the events that led up to it, and that Zimmerman would have been arrested if he had shot a white person. Of these measures, on all these measures, the non-blacks were much more reticent. Only 11% believed that Zimmerman was definitely guilty, while most said that the case was unclear or that they had no opinion. And only about 1/3 believed that racial bias was a factor, or that Zimmerman would have been arrested if the person he shot was white. So I throw that out, given this is now 17 years later, and the results of that survey are very similar to the same kind of racial divide found in 1995 survey on the murder trial of O.J. Simpson in L.A. Now, of course, the facts of that case are so different, but 78% of African Americans say that the jury found Simpson not guilty of murder was the right decision. 78%. Why only 42% of whites agreed with that finding. So I'm throwing this out under the issue of equal treatment by the judicial system. Charles Blau, reported in the New York Times. If you're interested in this article, I'll be happy to send it to you. New York Times columnist writes, and he's only the second person I've seen of color say that was a low moment for the African American community. First one I heard was Chris Rock in the stand-up routine. So when we bring up the issue today, and I said last month that I was uncomfortable, skeptical to use the moniker that this is our generation's Emmett Till case. That is why I'm throwing this out. That I don't think that we have had much progress since 1995. And I really envision that we had turned this page. Of course, a lot of other things show that it's not the case, not just in our judicial system, but in our school system. Since then, a report came out by the Department of Education that African American children, especially boys, have received more severe punishment in our schools than their white counterparts or their non-students of color. So just throwing this out as a background, I know we'll probably get to the stand your ground case by my colleague here, but I just wanted to revisit some of those comments from last month. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming out again this week. And just to say that I've been pondering since our last discussion on the whole Trayvon Martin case. And the thing that has been standing most in my mind has been, as my colleague stated, Florida's stand your ground law. Because we have to go forward. And in going forward, what does that mean? Because right now it seems to be not clear in how it is interpreted in some cases. It says here, as a statement of the law, a stand your ground law states that a person may use force in self-defense when there is reasonable belief of a threat without an obligation to retreat first. In some cases, a person may use deadly force in public areas without a duty to retreat. Under these legal concepts, a person is justified in using deadly force in certain situations, and the stand your ground law would be a defense of immunity to criminal charges and civil suit. The difference between immunity and a defense is that an immunity bars suit, charges, detention, and arrest. A defense, on the other hand, such as an affirmative defense, permits a plaintiff or the state to seek civil damages or criminal conviction, but may offer mitigating circumstances that justifies the accused's conduct. So, as I did before, and based on the definition here, I will pose some questions that we could further discuss among us. Because again, as I think of the Trayvon Martin case, most notably the dispatcher's directive to him, I beg to question, can one claim self-defense when they are responsible for aggravating a situation? And after hearing all the evidence, would the judge decide to dismiss the case, or should it be sent to a jury? Because right now, that's where it's at. The teams are looking at the evidence that's there, and once it's presented to the judge could decide, okay, based on the evidence that is here, the judge can make the decision to dismiss the case. On the other hand, it could be passed to the jury. So this is something that we have to look into or be aware that can take place. And most recently, too, in the media, I'm not sure how many are aware of the case of Marissa Alexander. And her sentence hearing is due on Friday, May 11th. Black woman being abused by her husband, fired a single shot. No one was dead, no one was injured. And yet, in 2010, she was charged. And though she tried to plead the Stand Your Ground law, it was unsuccessful. And if she's charged, she's looking to face up to 20 years mandatory sentence. Now, when I look at a case like that, and when I look at what's going on, again, my colleague alluded to the fact that if Zimmerman had killed a white man, he probably would have arrested. And I wonder here, if this was a white person, would they have been able to use the standalone law and get by with that? So there's always these questions that are up in the air. What then is the interpretation of self-defense? Again, our dear Governor, Rick Scott, has put together a task force to review the standalone law as it now stands. But it's made up primarily of the individuals who initially supported and passed the law. Where is the objectivity in that? Will this compromise the objectivity going forward? Do we think protecting oneself for the sake of this law should be confined to homes and businesses? These are things that would probably help in going forward with deciding the changes that need to be made to the bill. So I say here, let's stand our ground in thinking objectively about the implications of this Stand Your Ground law as it now stands, and consider what if it were me or a member of my family. And I leave my thorns to take it further.
Let me start first of all by saying Happy Mother's Day when it comes to the mothers.
Thank you.
And especially invite us to remember the mother of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, especially on that day, because both of them would be suffering different kinds of pain. Some of us might have heard about the recent event at Cornell University where some black students were attacked from the roof by some white students, and racist remarks were passed, and the name Trayvon Martin was invoked in that incident, suggesting that these white students were attacking the black students on the ground because of their color, and also because these black students were seen to be supporting Trayvon Martin in all of this. And I say that the incident at Cornell University is a strong indication that we are dealing with a bigger issue, and the psychosocial effects are far-reaching. To one group of us who think that we are being logical and objective, we think that the Trayvon Martin case was a slam dunk. Truth is that it is far from an open and shut case, because this issue has highlighted the great divide of racial tension. I say racial tension rather than racism, Robert, because as we struggle to accommodate our differences, what we are seeing is a decrease in racism as we know it from 30 years ago. But now we see an increase in the tension between blacks and whites as they try to negotiate their place in society. So that events such as the presidential election of 2008, the epic rise of media mogul like Oprah Winfrey, the commanding presence of black men as outstanding athletes and entertainers, they all suggest that one race is rising to take its place in the society, and the other race is trying to make sense of the changes. I don't think that white America disliked black America as we know it from 30 years ago, or even from the 1995 instance of O.J. Martin. Certainly not with the venomous passion of the Jim Crow era. But I think that there are two challenges that white America is contending with today, even as we consider the Trayvon Martin case. One, can white America trust the ascendancy of African Americans to the place where they will not be discriminated against or victimized for the atrocities of their forefathers? Two, white America still does not understand the black man and his reality. They don't understand why a black youth with a high GPA and a college scholarship would choose to wear a hoodie or dress like what they perceive to be a hoodlum. White America does not understand why talented and decent black families will still go to historically black churches, still support black artists, still flock black sponsored events, and go to historically black colleges. They don't understand, and they are struggling with these burning issues. What the Trayvon Martin's case has done, therefore, is to bring to the surface something that has been simmering for the past 20 or 30 years. A white America has watched and seen a lot of racist barriers torn down, and they are now exposed. They too wanted the barriers down, but now they feel vulnerable, and so if we see hooded fellows in our gated communities, or if we hear rowdy block parties in our established colleges, or if we see African Americans rising to the top of public institutions and corporations, we are left with a feeling of uncertainty, so we shoot them because of stereotyping. Or we arrest them and make them sit down on hot roadways while we search their fancy cars, which they should not be driving, because of something we call racial profiling. When someone is vulnerable, they are prone to do stupid things. George Zimmerman was not provoked by Trayvon Martin. The only provocation that George felt that evening was his own misconception of race and status, and that misconception manipulated his cognitive channels to act irrationally, and all the time he was thinking that he was being a good and upright citizen. Robert said that he was naive to think that we had turned the page in November 2008. And I dare say you were not naive, Robert. I think we turned the page that night. What has happened since then is that the script on the new page is strange to us, and we still cannot make sense of it. And I think that even as we consider the Trayvon Martin's case, and for some of us, we are very, very nervous about the possible outcome of the case. There are people who are scared that it might go the route of O.J. Simpson. There are people who think that it might go the case of Casey Anthony. There are people who think that George Zimmerman will get away because of the brilliance of the attorney who is working on his behalf. And there are so many speculations. But today, as we think about the racial tension that this society faces, I think that blacks and whites need to take an example from the first family. Black people need to understand why President and Mrs. Obama have chosen to operate on a higher plane and not allow the dictates of racial tension to determine the quality of life and governance that emanates from the White House. Despite the color of their skin and being representatives of a dispossessed race, the Obamas have carried themselves with consummate dignity and class. They have created a new standard for blacks to emulate. Live your life, be the best that you can with all the dignity that you can muster, and let your life tell the story. White America can themselves watch the Obamas. They have rewritten the code of conduct for black people, and the code is very acceptable. So let us begin to move towards recognizing that it is futile and asinine to judge a man by the color of his skin and the clothes he wears, and not by the content of his character and the intellectual and creative endowments that he carries within him. Long live the memory of Trayvon Martin, because this young man from a lonely grave in South Florida rises up to teach the world a lesson. Accept a person for who he is, not for who you perceive him to be. I think the world would be a better place if we listen to his voice.
Well, I'm sure that you're going to agree with me that we had another great round of presentations from our panel that causes us to that really have all of us thinking right now along the lines of their presentation based on, again, three almost distinct points of reference. Robert's being pretty much on what progress have we really made with examples to support that. And Susan's focus on the law, the stand your ground law, and what do we see in terms of objectivity as it regards this law and the application of it in the present and for the future. And then Clyde really focusing in on this being a bigger issue than we generally think about it, and then bringing into focus or questioning what is it that white America really thinks, and how are we really reacting to other segments of our society, and really challenging us in those last few comments. That makes us really kind of go deep. So, with those perspectives in front of us, let's talk right now. Let's discuss. And a couple of things come to my mind as you're getting ready to share your thoughts. Tatiana wanted to come back to us from her own personal involvement with this, and from speaking with others, to talk about forgiveness. So let's keep that concept on the table as we talk about things today. And I remember from last time, and I'm glad to see him come in today, that Michael talked very emphatically last time about no guns for anyone. So let's keep those thoughts in mind as we share our continued thoughts today. Questions and comments at this time? Yes, Michael.
I'm not sure if I said no guns for anyone.
Maybe the for anyone could have been left off, but you said no guns.
People would be hard pressed to take my Remington 870 shotgun away. It's in there. On the other hand, the proliferation of weapons makes it awfully easy to make significant life-changing mistakes, or just life-changing actions that probably most of us are not prepared to deal with because of our background, our experience, our training, our preparation, or even our just approach to things. And so laws like the whatever the gun law is called are really so politically incorrect that we need to fight those kinds of things. The other issues are ones that we can deal with also.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Let me throw this out to you. As we have included in the title of both of these sessions, the concept social justice, what does that mean to you? No one have any? Yes.
Well,
Judy.
I have to say, and I know this is politically incorrect, but I'm going to say it anyway. Social justice is, I always thought that, you know, a lot of things are said in the name of social justice. For example, as a magnet administrator, we drew lines, and we drew, based on our court order, we said 30% black in this school, 70% non-black, and we called that social justice. What the parents called it was social engineering. They thought of it as, you know, I send my child to school to be educated, not to be desegregated, said the parents to me. So the connotation of social justice, which many of us hold to, particularly public school educators like myself, have been under attack a lot. And not just by intellectuals, but also by parents and other groups who say what we think we're doing, we educated class in the name of social justice, is not social justice. So I just want to bring that up because I think that's an interesting paper.
It's very interesting.
Correct.
You're so quiet today.
I don't know if anybody else is.
I think of social justice in terms of how people are treated, the process that's used in terms of protocol or process in dealing with situations. And many people think equity and equal are the same, but they aren't in the sense of social justice, because equal may mean that I'm going to assess the same guidelines or